Mafia boss ignored wife's call while kissing his mistress. That day, his empire fell forever. The chandeliers inside the grand ballroom of the Palazzo Hotel did not just shimmer, they burned with an arrogance that matched the man standing beneath them. Luca Moretti held a crystal tumbler of amber scotch, his grip loose but possessive, as if the glass, the liquor, and the very air in the room belonged to him by divine right. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than most men earned in a year, the fabric midnight blue and tailored to accentuate the breadth of his shoulders and the lean, predatory taper of his waist. Around him, the city's elite circled like moths drawn to a dangerous flame. There were senators with forced smiles, judges with debts to pay, and captains of industry who had long ago traded their ethics for Moretti protection. Lucas smiled at a joke he did not find funny, his eyes scanning the room with the practiced vigilance of a predator who knows he is at the top of the food chain but refuses to stop hunting. This party was ostensibly a charity gala for the city's orphanages, a tax write-off that played well in the morning papers. In reality, it was a display of dominion. It was Luca telling the city that he was untouchable, that the federal investigations whispered about in the back alleys were nothing more than rumors. He felt a hand on his arm, light as a feather but heavy with history. He turned to see Sophia. His wife stood beside him, a vision in emerald silk that clung to her form and pooled around her feet. Her dark hair was swept up, revealing the long, elegant line of her neck, adorned only by a simple diamond pendant he had given her 10 years ago. She was beautiful, undeniably so, but it was a beauty that had grown sharp and brittle, like glass about to shatter. Luca leaned in, pressing a kiss to her cheek that was more for the cameras flashing in the distance than for her. "You are late," he murmured against her skin, his voice low and smooth, carrying no heat, only expectation. Sophia pulled back, just an inch, her dark eyes meeting his. Once, those eyes had looked at him with a fire that could burn the world down. Now, they were empty wells, reflecting nothing but the artificial light of the ballroom. "The traffic was terrible," Sophia said, her voice flat, "and I had to make a stop." "Smile." "Sophia," Luca commanded softly, turning her toward the crowd, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "They are watching. Do not look like you are attending a funeral." Sophia forced the corners of her lips upward. It was a perfect, hollow imitation of joy. She stood there for 20 minutes, nodding at the right times, shaking the hands of men she knew were murderers, and accepting compliments from women she knew despised her. She played the part of the dutiful mafia wife, the silent ornament on the arm of the king. Then, during a lull when Luca turned to speak to a councilman about zoning permits for the new docks, Sophia stepped back. She did not make a scene. She simply ghosted away, slipping through the crowd with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime learning how to be invisible. Luca turned back to introduce her, but the space beside him was empty. He frowned, scanning the room, but the emerald dress was gone. He felt a flicker of irritation, a small scratch on his ego, but he brushed it off. Sophia was moody lately. She would be at home, waiting in the library with a book, as she always was. He returned his attention to the councilman, the moment forgotten. 3 hours later, the rain began to fall over the city, turning the neon lights of the skyline into smeared streaks of red and blue. But inside the penthouse suite of the Obsidian Hotel, the storm outside did not matter. The air in the room was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the musk of desire. Luca lay back against the plush velvet headboard, his tie undone and hanging loose around his neck, his shirt unbuttoned to reveal the hard expanse of his chest. Straddling his lap was Valeria. At 24 years old, Valeria was everything Sophia was not. She was chaos and noise, a creature of impulse who demanded to be looked at. Her blonde hair was a wild halo around her face, and her eyes were bright with a reckless hunger that fed Luca's ego. She did not know the business. She did not know the bodies buried in the foundations of his construction sites. She only knew Luca the man, the provider, the lover. "You are tense tonight, baby," Valeria purred, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, her nails lightly scraping against the stubble. She shifted her weight, the silk of her robe slipping off one shoulder to reveal the smooth, pale skin beneath. "Just business," Luca grunted, then his hands finding her waist, gripping her firmly. The touch was electric. Valeria laughed, a throaty sound that vibrated against his chest. "Forget business," she whispered, leaning down to brush her lips against his. "You are here with me now. The world can burn for all I care." She kissed him then, a searing, demanding kiss that tasted of champagne and trouble. Luca closed his eyes, losing himself in the sensation. This was what he needed. Not the silent judgment he felt at home, but this adoration, this physical surrender. Valeria moved with a frantic energy, her hands tangling in his hair, her body pressing urgently against his. The chemistry between them was intoxicating, a drug that made him feel young again, dangerous and alive. On the bedside table, his phone began to buzz. It vibrated against the mahogany surface, a harsh, rhythmic sound that cut through the heavy atmosphere of the room. Luca ignored it, his mouth moving to Valeria's neck, his hands roaming over the curve of her back. The buzzing stopped, then started again immediately, persistent, urgent. Valeria pulled back slightly, breathless, her lips swollen. She glanced at the phone, then back at him, a playful pout on her face. "Someone really wants your attention. Luca," Luca groaned, keeping one arm wrapped around Valeria as he reached out blindly with the other. He grabbed the phone and glanced at the screen. Sophia. The name flashed in white letters against the dark background. For a split second, Luca hesitated. Sophia never called him this late. If she was calling, it meant something was wrong, or perhaps she just wanted to complain about his absence, to ask when he would be home. The thought of her voice, tired, accusing, or worse, indifferent, drenched the fire in his blood. He did not want to hear it. He did not want reality. He wanted the fantasy that Valeria offered. He looked at Valeria. She was watching him, her eyes challenging him, asking him silently who mattered more in this moment. Luca made his choice. He pressed the button on the side of the phone, silencing the call. He did not decline it. He simply muted the world. He did not even check to see if there was a voicemail. He dropped the phone back onto the nightstand, screen down. "No one is important," Luca said, his voice rough. Valeria smiled, a victorious feline curve of her lips. "Good," she whispered, and she pulled him back down to her, sealing his fate with a kiss, across the city, in the sprawling, silent mansion that Luca called home. Sophia Moretti sat on the edge of the California King bed. The room was dark, save for the moonlight spilling in through the French doors. The house was massive, a fortress of stone and marble, but tonight it felt like a tomb. She held her phone in her lap, the screen glowing in the darkness. The call had gone to voicemail. He had silenced her. She did not cry. She was far past the point of tears. Tears were for women who still had hope, and Sophia had lost her last shred of hope somewhere between the charity gala and this empty bedroom. She looked down at the text message she had typed out minutes before calling. Her thumb hovered over the send button. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. A eulogy for a marriage that had died years ago. Though neither of them had signed the death certificate until now, she pressed send. "You won't get another chance." The message swooshed away, delivered instantly to the man currently in the arms of another woman. Sophia set the phone down and stood up. She walked to the window, looking out over the manicured gardens that were shadowed in the rain. Her mind drifted back, unbidden, to a time before the mansions and the mistresses. She remembered 1999. They were 20 years old, living in a cramped walk-up in the chaotic heart of the city. Luca hadn't been a boss then. He was just a soldier, hungry and reckless. She remembered the night he came home bleeding, a rival's knife having slashed his ribs. He had collapsed in the hallway, pale and terrified. Sophia hadn't screamed. She hadn't called the police. She had dragged him into the bathroom, cut off his shirt, and stitched him up with a sewing needle and a bottle of vodka, her hands shaking only after he had passed out from the pain. She remembered the way he had looked at her the next morning, his eyes feverish but filled with a devotion that felt holy. "You and me, Sophia," he had whispered, gripping her hand so hard it hurt. "We are going to own this city, and I will never let anything hurt you. I swear it." She had believed him. She had covered for him when the cops came knocking. She had washed the blood out of his shirts. She had hidden money in cereal boxes and memorized the codes to his burner phones. She had seen the man inside the monster, the scared boy who just wanted to be safe. "You lied," she whispered to the empty glass of the window. The man she loved was dead. The man in the hotel room was a stranger who wore his face. Sophia turned away from the window. Nostalgia was a trap, and she could not afford to be caught in it. She went to the walk-in closet, but she did not pack a suitcase. Not yet. Instead, she reached for a heavy woolen coat and a pair of nondescript leather boots. She pulled a black beanie over her hair, obscuring her face. 20 minutes later, she was driving a sedan that was registered to a shell company unrelated to the Moretti family. She drove through the rain-slicked streets, heading away from the opulent suburbs and toward the industrial district, where the shadows were longer and the questions were fewer. She pulled up to a 24-hour private vault facility, a nondescript brick building that catered to the kind of clientele who preferred their assets to remain off the grid. Sophia had rented a box here 5 years ago, paying in cash, under her maiden name, the night guard, a tired man with a coffee stain on his shirt, barely looked up as she scanned her key card and passed through the steel turnstile. Down in the basement, the air was cool and smelled of dust and old paper. Sophia found box number 402. Her hands were steady as she inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked, a sound like a gunshot in the silence. She pulled the metal box out and carried it to the small viewing table. Inside was the insurance policy she had prayed she would never have to use. There were stacks of documents, photocopied in secret while Luca slept or was away on business. There were bank statements from the Cayman Islands, routing numbers for the shell companies that laundered the drug money, and ledgers that detailed the bribes paid to city officials. But the most damning item was a small, silver flash drive. It contained audio recordings, Luca, drunk on his own power, bragging about the orders he had given. The hit on the union leader 3 years ago, the fire at the warehouse that claimed 2 lives. He had spoken to her about these things in the privacy of their bedroom, thinking she was his confessor, his safe harbor. He had forgotten that a harbor can close its gates. She had recorded him, not out of malice, but out of a terrifying instinct that told her one day she would need leverage to survive him. She stared at the drive. This was not just evidence. It was a nuclear bomb. It would destroy Luca. It would destroy the organization. It would destroy the life they had built. "God forgive me," she whispered. She closed the box, placed the contents into her leather satchel, and walked out. She drove to an all-night diner on the edge of the city, a place with flickering neon lights and coffee that tasted like battery acid. A man was waiting for her in the back booth. Arthur Penhaligon was 60 years old, a lawyer who had served the Moretti family for 3 decades. But before he served the family, he had been Sophia's father's friend. He was the only one left who remembered Sophia as a person, not just a possession. Arthur looked up as she slid into the booth. He wore a raincoat over his pajamas, his gray hair disheveled. He looked terrified. "Sophia," he breathed, keeping his voice low. "Do you know what time it is?" "I have it." "Arthur?" she said. Ignoring his question, she placed the heavy satchel on the table between them. Arthur stared at the bag as if it contained a severed head. He reached out, his hand trembling, and opened the flap just enough to see the ledgers inside. He went pale. "The ledger from the construction contracts?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "And the offshore accounts and the recordings?" Arthur closed his eyes and exhaled a long, shaky breath. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Luca will kill us. If he finds out I touched this." "He won't just kill us, Sophia. He will make it slow." "He won't find out until it is too late," Sophia said. Her voice was steel. "He's distracted. He thinks I am at home, crying over his infidelity. He underestimates me. He always has." Arthur looked at her, seeing the resolve in her face. He saw the girl she used to be, buried under layers of pain and indifference. "This is the end of the Moretti Empire," Arthur said quietly. "You understand that, don't you? The feds have been fishing for this for years. You are handing them the hook, the line, and the sinker." "I know." Arthur leaned in closer. The diner was empty except for a truck driver at the counter, but Arthur lowered his voice to a whisper. "Are you sure? Once we release this, once I hand this to my contact at the prosecutor's office, there is no coming back. No reconciliation, no divorce settlement. This is war. Sophia, total war." Sophia looked out the window at the rain hammering against the glass. She thought of the empty space beside her at the party. She thought of the silence on the phone line. She thought of the lipstick stain she had found on Luca's collar 3 weeks ago, and the way he hadn't even bothered to hide it. She didn't want his money. She didn't want his power. She wanted her freedom. And she knew that the only way to be free of a man like Luca Moretti was to bury him under the weight of his own sins. She looked back at Arthur. Her eyes were dry, clear and dangerous. "I'm sure," she said. "Burn it down." The morning sun struggled to pierce the heavy gray clouds hanging over the city, casting a pale, washed-out light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Moretti dining room. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic, hollow clink of silver spoons against fine china. Luca Moretti sat at the head of the long mahogany table. Freshly showered and shaved, he wore a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, exposing the faint scars that mapped his violent history. He smelled of expensive cologne and strong coffee, an armor of normalcy he had donned the moment he walked through the front door at 7 in the morning. He acted as though he had simply returned from an early meeting or a late night at the office, the lie resting comfortably on his shoulders like a well-worn coat. Sophia sat at the opposite end of the table. The distance between them felt like miles. She was not eating. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of herbal tea that had long since gone cold. She wore a high-collared silk blouse and dark trousers, her posture rigid, her face a mask of impenetrable porcelain. She looked at him, but it was not the look of a wife greeting her husband. It was the look of a judge observing a condemned man who did not yet know the verdict. Luca buttered a piece of toast, the sound scraping loudly in the quiet room. He cleared his throat, the silence finally grating on his nerves. "The gala was a success," he said, his tone conversational, casual. "Senator Reeves was asking about you after you left. I told him you had a migraine." Sophia did not blink. She set her mug down with a deliberate slowness. "Did you?" "Yes," Luca said, taking a bite of the toast. He chewed, swallowed, and wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "You should call his wife today. Send some flowers. Keep up appearances." Sophia laughed, a short, sharp sound that lacked any humor. It was a dry, brittle noise, like dry leaves being crushed underfoot. "Appearances," she repeated softly. "That is all that matters to you, isn't it? How things look, not how they are." Luca frowned, his patience thinning. He had expected tears or perhaps a shouting match. He was prepared for anger. He was not prepared for this cold, detached indifference. It unsettled him. It felt foreign, like walking into a room in his own house that he did not recognize. "I'm not in the mood for riddles." "Sophia," Luca said, his voice dropping an octave, warningly. "I had a long night." "I know," Sophia said. Her eyes bored into him, dark and unreadable. "I called you." Luca paused. He remembered the buzzing phone on the nightstand, the name flashing on the screen while Valeria's hands were on him. He felt a flicker of guilt, but he crushed it instantly. He was Luca Moretti. He did not answer to anyone, not even his wife. "My battery died," he lied smoothly. "I was stuck in meetings until 3. I stayed at the city apartment to avoid waking you." The lie hung in the air between them, insulting in its laziness. Sophia stood up. Her chair scraped against the floorboards. She looked at him with an expression that was almost pitiful. "You lie so easily now," she said quietly. You do not even try to make it believable anymore." She turned to leave the room, her movements precise and controlled. At the doorway, she paused, her hand resting on the frame. She did not look back at him. "Enjoy your breakfast, Luca," she said. "You will see me when it is too late." Luca opened his mouth to demand what she meant, to order her back to the table, but the vibration of his phone against the mahogany surface cut him off. He glanced down. It was Marco, his consigliere. Marco never called before 9 unless the world was ending. Luca snatched the phone up. Sophia's strange comment instantly forgotten. "Speak." "We have a problem, boss." Marco's voice was tight, laced with the static of a bad connection. "The supply line coming up from the port, the one running the electronics shipments." "What about it?" Luca asked, his grip on the phone tightening. "It was hit 2 hours ago, just outside the city limits." "Who?" Luca demanded. "The Russians? The Triads?" "That is the thing." "Luca," Marco said, and Luca could hear the fear in his old friend's voice. "It wasn't a gang, it was the feds, but it wasn't a standard bust. They didn't stop the trucks for a weigh-in. They were waiting. They knew exactly which crate in the third truck had the false bottom. They went straight for the cash and the ledgers. It was surgical." Luca felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "That route is new. Only 3 people know the schedule." "I know," Marco whispered. "That is why I am calling. We have a leak. A bad one." Luca stared at the empty chair where Sophia had just been sitting. A coincidence, he told himself. Just a coincidence. Sophia was angry about a mistress. She wasn't ratting him out to the FBI. She didn't have the stomach for it. She didn't know the details. "Find out who talked," Luca ordered, his voice ice, "and bring them to me." He hung up, his appetite gone. He sat alone in the vast, silent dining room, the shadows from the clouds outside stretching long across the table. His phone buzzed again, a text message. He looked at the screen, expecting another update from Marco. Instead, he saw a name that made his pulse jump, a reflex he could not control. Valeria. "Last night was magic," the message read. "I can still smell you on my sheets. When can I have you again tonight? I'll be waiting." A small, involuntary smile touched Luca's lips, softening the hard lines of his face. Valeria. She was the antidote to this poison. She was simple. She wanted him, and she didn't ask questions about trucks or raids or leaking information. She just wanted Luca. He typed back quickly. "Tonight, the penthouse, 8 o'clock. He hit send, visualizing her smile, the way she would bite her lip when she read it. He slid the phone into his pocket, completely unaware that the device was no longer just a phone. It was a beacon. Every keystroke, every location ping, every message was being mirrored on a server in a secure government facility 10 miles away. That night, the sky broke open. Thunder rattled the windows of the penthouse suite that overlooked the city skyline. The rain was a torrential sheet of gray, blurring the lights of the skyscrapers into abstract paintings of gold and white. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and dim. Jazz played softly from hidden speakers, competing with the drumbeat of the rain against the glass. Luca sat on the sprawling velvet sofa, a glass of wine in his hand. He was staring out at the storm, his mind racing. Marco had called again. Another warehouse had been visited by health inspectors who asked too many questions. A bank contact in Switzerland had sent a cryptic email about regulatory reviews. The walls were closing in, inch by inch, but Luca could not see the hands pushing them. "You are 1,000,000 miles away," a voice murmured. Valeria crawled across the sofa toward him. She moved with the grace of a jungle cat, her movements fluid and predatory. She wore a dress of crimson silk that hung loosely on her frame, one strap slipping down her shoulder to reveal the smooth, pale slope of her skin. She straddled his lap, effectively blocking his view of the storm. Her hands came up to cup his face, her palms warm against his cool skin. Her eyes were wide and dark, searching his face for the affection she craved. "I am right here," Luca said, though he knew it was a lie. "Prove it," she whispered. She leaned in and kissed him. It was a hungry, demanding kiss. Her lips were soft, tasting of the expensive red wine he had poured for her. She pressed her body against his, the silk of her dress offering no barrier to the heat of her skin. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, anchoring him to her. Luca responded. He placed his hands on her waist, pulling her flush against him. He kissed the hollow of her throat, feeling her pulse flutter like a trapped bird. He traced the line of her spine through the fabric of her dress, his touch practiced and sure, but as her breath hitched and she whispered his name against his ear, Luca felt profound, terrifying emptiness open up inside him. It was physical? Yes. The sensation was there. The chemistry was undeniable, but it felt performative. He was going through the motions of passion, mimicking the actions of a man in love, but his heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm that had nothing to do with the woman in his arms. He looked past her shoulder at the rain lashing against the glass. He thought of Sophia. He remembered a night, years ago, when they had been caught in a storm like this. They had been running from a botched deal, hiding out in a leaky motel room in Jersey. They had huddled together under a thin blanket, shivering, terrified that the door would be kicked in at any moment. They hadn't had sex that night. They had just held each other. He remembered the smell of her damp hair. He remembered the way her heartbeat had synced with his, a double rhythm that said, "We are alive. We are together. We are one." That was intimacy. This thing with Valeria was just friction. It was a distraction, a drug to numb the silence. But the silence was growing louder. "Luca?" Valeria pulled back, sensing his drift, her brow furrowed. "What is wrong? Is it me?" "No," Luca said, forcing his attention back to her. He ran his thumb over her bottom lip. "Just the storm. It makes me restless." He pulled her down for another kiss. Harder this time. Desperate to feel something real. Desperate to drown out the ghost of his wife that seemed to be haunting the corners of the room. While Luca chased a phantom feeling in the penthouse, Sophia sat in a room that was the antithesis of luxury. The interrogation room in the federal building was stark white, illuminated by fluorescent lights that buzzed with a low, irritating hum. There were no windows. The table was metal, bolted to the floor. Across from Sophia sat Aileen Vaughn. Aileen was 35, with sharp features and eyes that had seen too much of the city's underbelly to be surprised by anything. She was the lead prosecutor for the Organized Crime Division. For 5 years, she'd been trying to pin a charge on Luca Moretti that would stick. For 5 years, she had failed. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence vanished. Judges were bought. Tonight, however, the look on Aileen's face was not one of frustration. It was one of disbelief. On the metal table between them sat the leather satchel Sophia had retrieved from the vault. The contents were spread out. The ledgers, the bank statements, the flash drive. Aileen picked up a stack of papers, flipping through them. Her eyes widened as she scanned the lines of numbers. "This is..." Aileen trailed off, looking up at Sophia. "This is everything. The construction kickbacks, the union bribes, the laundering scheme through the casinos. It is all there," Sophia said. Her voice was steady, devoid of emotion. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. She looked like a queen in exile. "Dates, names, account numbers. The recordings on the drive will corroborate the paper trail. You will hear his voice ordering the fires. You will hear him laughing about the payoffs." Aileen set the papers down. She looked at Sophia with a mixture of professional admiration and personal curiosity. "Why now?" Aileen asked. "We have tried to flip you before, Mrs. Moretti. We approached you 3 years ago. You told my agents to go to hell. Things change," Sophia said simply. "Did he hit you?" Aileen asked gently. "If there is domestic abuse, we can add that to the charges. We can get you immediate protection." "No," Sophia said. "He never hit me. He did something worse." She did not elaborate. She did not need to tell this federal agent about the slow erosion of her soul, about the nights spent waiting, about the humiliation of the other woman, about the realization that she had sacrificed her own morality for a man who saw her as furniture. "I am not doing this for revenge, Miss Vaughn," Sophia said, her gaze hard. "I am doing this because I know how this story ends. Luca is reckless. He thinks he is a god, but gods fall. And when he falls, the whole mountain comes down. I will not be buried under the rubble." Aileen nodded slowly. She tapped the flash drive with her pen. "This is excellent, Sophia." "Truly. But for a RICO case this size, for a life sentence, I need a witness. I need someone to stand on the stand, look the jury in the eye, and explain what these numbers mean. I need you to testify." Sophia shook her head. The movement was small but absolute. "No. Sophia," Aileen pressed, leaning forward. "With your testimony, we lock him away forever. Without it, a good lawyer might be able to argue some of this is circumstantial or inadmissible. You are the key. I gave you the gun," Sophia said, standing up. "I gave you the bullets. You have to pull the trigger yourself." "Where will you go?" Aileen asked, sensing she was losing her. "We can put you in witness protection. We can give you a new life." "I have already arranged my own life," Sophia said. She buttoned her coat. "I disappear when this starts. Tonight, you will not find me. Luca will not find me. He will look for you," Aileen warned. "When he realizes what you have done, he will tear the earth apart to find you." "Let him look," Sophia said. A flicker of pain crossed her face. There and gone in an instant. "He never really saw me when I was standing right in front of him. He won't have any better luck when I'm gone." Sophia walked to the door. She paused, her hand on the knob. "Miss Vaughn?" "Yes?" "Do not underestimate him," Sophia said softly. "He is a monster. But he is a monster who believes he is a hero. That makes him dangerous." With that, Sophia Moretti walked out of the room, leaving the evidence that would end her husband's life scattered across the metal table. 2 hours later, the first domino fell. Luca was buttoning his shirt in the penthouse bedroom. Valeria was in the shower, humming a tune, the steam rolling out from the bathroom door. Luca checked his phone. There was an email from his personal banker in the Caymans. It was flagged urgently. "Mr. Moretti, unable to process the transfer requested. Accounts 894 and 895 have been frozen by international decree. We have received a flag from the U.S. Department of Justice. Please advise me immediately." Lucas stared at the screen. The blood drained from his face. The Cayman accounts were bulletproof. They were buried under layers of shell companies and ghost directors. No one could touch them. No one even knew they existed, except him and Marco and Sophia. The thought hit him like a physical blow to the chest. No, it was impossible. Sophia didn't know the account numbers. His phone rang. It was the foreman at the main distribution warehouse in the meatpacking district. "Boss," the foreman sounded breathless, panicked. "You need to know. We just got hit with a subpoena. Federal agents are here. They aren't raiding us. They are seizing records. They have a warrant for the computers. They specifically asked for the files from 2022. The year they had washed the construction money through the warehouse payroll." Luca sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. The pieces were clicking together in his mind, forming a picture he did not want to see. The precise raid on the truck, the frozen accounts, the specific warrant. Someone hadn't just leaked information. Someone had handed over the blueprints to the castle. Valeria walked out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, her skin pink and glowing. "Who is that?" she asked, smiling. Luca didn't answer. He stood up, grabbing his jacket. His movements were jerky, frantic. A cold, creeping dread was spreading through his veins, a feeling he hadn't felt since he was a street soldier dodging bullets. "Luca?" Valeria asked, her smile fading. "Get dressed," Luca said, his voice hollow. "I have to go." "Go! But you said—" "I said get dressed," he roared, the violence in his voice making her flinch. He stormed out of the bedroom, dialing Marco's number as he walked toward the elevator. The thunder outside crashed again, shaking the building, but the storm inside Luca's head was far louder. "Marco," Luca said when the line connected, "check the safe deposit box, the one Sophia keeps her jewelry in." "Why?" "Just do it," Luca shouted into the phone, "and tell the men to sweep the house for bugs. Now." He stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close, his reflection in the polished metal looking back at him, pale, wide-eyed, and realizing, perhaps for the first time, that he was not the one holding the gun anymore. The air inside the Moretti organization had curdled. What had once been an atmosphere of ironclad loyalty and silent discipline was now thick with the acrid scent of paranoia. It hung in the hallways of their private social clubs, drifted through the back rooms of their warehouses, and settled like dust on the shoulders of every soldier who stood guard. Men who had trusted each other with their lives for a decade now exchanged wary glances, wondering who was wearing a wire, who was talking to the feds, and who would be the next to disappear. Luca Moretti felt the shift in the atmosphere more acutely than anyone. He was the king, and a king always knows when the foundation of his castle begins to crack. He paced the length of his private office in the back of an innocuous Italian import business in the meatpacking district. The blinds were drawn, slicing the afternoon sun into thin, dusty strips. On his desk lay a report from his head of security. 3 more supply routes had been compromised in the last 48 hours. Not raided, but diverted, blocked, squeezed by regulatory agencies that had never looked twice at a Moretti truck before. The door opened, and Marco stepped in. His consigliere looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually immaculate suit looked slept in. "We have a problem with the unions," Marco said, closing the door softly. "The dock workers are refusing to unload the shipment from Naples. They say they received an anonymous tip that the crates contain contraband. They are demanding a federal inspection before they touch anything." Luca stopped pacing. He turned slowly to face Marco. The rage that had been simmering in his gut for 2 days suddenly boiled over, hot and blinding. "An anonymous tip," Luca repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Yes," Marco said, walking toward the desk. "Someone is feeding them specifics. Luca, they knew the container numbers." "Someone," Luca mocked. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, closing the distance between them. "You are supposed to be the eyes and ears of this family. Marco, you are the one who wets the beaks. You are the one who keeps the rats out of the cellar. And yet, my accounts are frozen. My warehouses are being subpoenaed, and now my ships are sitting in the harbor waiting for the FBI to cut them open. I am doing everything I can," Marco started. Luca lunged. His hand shot out, gripping Marco by the lapels of his jacket and slamming him back against the wood-paneled wall. The force of the impact shook a framed painting of the Amalfi Coast. "Crooked! You are doing nothing!" Luca roared, his face inches from Marco's. "You are sleeping, or worse, you are the one opening the door." "Luca, stop!" Marco gasped, gripping Luca's wrists, trying to pry the younger, stronger man off him. "I am your brother. I would die for you. You know this. Then why is my empire crumbling?" Luca tightened his grip, shoving Marco harder against the wall. "Who is it? Is it Sal? Is it Vinny? Give me a name, Marco, or I will start carving names out of people myself." "It is not the ranks," Marco shouted back, staring into Luca's wild, bloodshot eyes. "I have grilled every captain. I have checked the phone records. No one is talking. This is coming from the outside. Luca, it is too clean. It is too intimate. Whoever is doing this knows where the bodies are buried because they watched us dig the graves." Luca stared at him, his chest heaving. The logic pierced through his rage, sharp and undeniable. The leaks were indeed intimate. They targeted the things only a handful of people knew about. He slowly released Marco's lapels. Marco slumped slightly, smoothing his jacket, his breathing ragged. "If it is not the ranks," Luca hissed, stepping back, "then we have a ghost. Find the ghost, Marco, or we are all dead men." While Luca was tearing his organization apart looking for a ghost, the ghost was standing in the master bathroom of the Moretti estate, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Sophia looked calm. It was a terrifying kind of calm, the stillness of the ocean before a tsunami. She had spent the last 10 years building this life, decorating this house, hosting these parties, and protecting these secrets, and now she was dismantling it all in the span of an hour. On the bed in the master suite lay a single leather duffel bag. It was small, unassuming, inside. She had packed only the essentials, a change of clothes, 2 passports, 1 real, 1 false, a stack of cash thick enough to last her 6 months, a photograph of her parents, long deceased. She had left behind the jewels. She had left behind the furs, the designer gowns, the shoes that cost more than a car. She left them hanging in the closet like shed skin. She did not want anything that Luca had bought her. She did not want anything that carried the weight of his blood money. She walked back into the bathroom. On the marble counter, next to the silver tray where she kept her perfumes, sat a small velvet ring box. Sophia looked down at her left hand. The diamond on her finger was massive, a flawless stone that caught the light and shattered it into 1,000 rainbows. It was a symbol of possession, a mark that said she belonged to Luca Moretti. She reached out with her right hand and gripped the ring. It was tight. She had lost weight recently from the stress, but the ring still clung to her as if it knew it was being rejected. She twisted it. It slid over the knuckle with a heavy, reluctant drag. For a moment, she held it in her palm. It felt cold, heavy. She did not put it in the velvet box. That would be too respectful. Instead, she set it directly on the cold, white marble of the sink. It sat there, stark and abandoned, a gleaming artifact of a dead civilization. Sophia picked up the duffel bag. She did not look around the room. She did not say goodbye to the ghosts of the children they never had, or the memories of the nights they had spent tangled in these sheets. She simply walked out of the bedroom, down the grand staircase, and out the front door. She got into her car, drove through the iron gates, and turned left. She did not look in the rearview mirror. Luca returned home 3 hours later. The confrontation with Marco had left him drained and sour. He needed a drink. He needed silence. And, though he would never admit it to himself, he needed Sophia. He needed her quiet presence, the way she would listen to him vent without judging, the way she grounded him when the world started spinning too fast. He walked into the foyer. The house was dark. "Sophia," he called out. Silence. He walked into the kitchen. Empty. The staff had been dismissed for the night. He went upstairs, loosening his tie as he climbed. A strange unease began to prickle at the back of his neck. Usually, there was music playing, or the scent of candles, or just the feeling of another person displacing the air. Tonight, the house felt like a museum after closing hours. He pushed open the door to the master bedroom. "Sophia, are you asleep?" The bed was made. The pillows were perfectly fluffed, unmarred by the weight of a head. Luca frowned. He walked into the bathroom. The light was on. He stepped inside, expecting to see her in the bath, or perhaps applying her night cream. The room was empty. Then he saw it. The diamond ring sat on the edge of the marble sink. It was the only thing on the counter. It caught the overhead light, winking at him with a mocking brilliance. Luca stared at it. For a long time, he simply could not process what he was seeing. Sophia never took off her ring. She slept in it. She showered in it. It was part of her. He reached out and picked it up. It was cold. He walked back into the bedroom, his heart hammering a strange, erratic rhythm against his ribs. He pulled his phone out and dialed her number. It rang, and rang, and rang. "The customer you are calling is unavailable. Please leave a message." "Sophia," Luca said to the empty room, his voice sounding loud and pathetic. "Pick up the phone." He called again. Same result. He looked at the closet. Her clothes were there. Her shoes were there. It didn't make sense. Where would she go without her things? She left. A voice in his head whispered, "She left you." "No," Luca said aloud. He tossed the ring onto the bed. "She is dramatic. She is punishing me. She will be back tomorrow." He forced himself to believe it. Sophia was his. She had nowhere else to go. She had no family left. She had no money of her own, at least, none that he knew of. She was just acting out, trying to scare him because of the affair. But the unease did not leave. It settled in his gut, heavy and cold like a stone. He couldn't stay in this house. The silence was too loud. It was suffocating him. He turned on his heel and marched out. He needed noise. He needed adoration. He needed Valeria. The Velvet Room was one of the most exclusive nightclubs in the city, and naturally, Luca owned it. The bass thumped so hard it rattled the teeth in his skull, a rhythmic, primal heartbeat that drowned out the thoughts racing through his mind. He sat in his private booth on the mezzanine level, overlooking the writhing sea of bodies on the dance floor below. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, but he wasn't drinking it. He was watching the stage. Valeria was dancing. She moved with a sinuous, hypnotic grace, her body clad in a shimmering silver dress that looked like liquid mercury. She knew he was watching. She played to him, casting sultry glances up at the dark glass of his booth, her movements becoming sharper, more provocative. She was beautiful. She was vibrant. She was everything that was currently missing from his life. When her set ended, she didn't go to the dressing room. She came straight up to the booth. She slid onto the leather bench beside him, breathless and glowing with sweat and adrenaline. "Did you like what you saw?" she teased, leaning in to bite his earlobe. "Let's go," Lucas said. He didn't smile. He stood up, pulling her by the hand. They bypassed the main exit and took the private elevator that led down to the garage. As soon as the polished steel doors slid shut, sealing them in a metal box, the tension snapped. Valeria pushed him against the mirrored wall. Her hands were everywhere, on his chest, in his hair, fumbling with his belt. She kissed him with a ferocious intensity, her mouth hot and demanding. "I missed you," she murmured against his lips. "I hate it when you go home to her." Luca gripped her waist. He pulled her close, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled her scent, vanilla and expensive perfume. He tried to lose himself in it. He tried to summon the heat, the reckless passion that usually consumed him when he was with her. He kissed her back. He felt the curve of her hip, the softness of her skin. But then, his eyes opened. Over Valeria's shoulder, he saw his own reflection in the elevator mirror. He looked pale, distracted. His eyes were not the eyes of a lover. They were the eyes of a hunted animal. In his mind, he didn't see the woman in his arms. He saw the ring sitting on the cold marble sink. He saw the empty bed. He saw the stack of frozen account notices on his desk. He stopped. He froze, his hands going still on Valeria's waist. Valeria sensed the shift immediately. She pulled back, her lips swollen, her eyes confused. "Luca," she breathed. "What is it? Did I do something wrong?" Luca stared at her, but he looked right through her. The desire had evaporated, replaced by a sickening lurch of anxiety. He felt exposed, vulnerable. "I can't," he muttered. He gently pushed her away and straightened his jacket. "What do you mean? You can't?" Valeria asked, hurt flashing across her face. "We are right here. No one is watching." "I said I can't," Luca snapped. He hit the button for the garage level repeatedly, though the elevator was already moving. It is somewhere else. I have to go." The elevator dinged. The doors opened. Luca stepped out without waiting for her, leaving Valeria standing alone in the metal box, confused and rejected, watching the man she thought she controlled walk away from her, while Luca was fleeing his own reflection. Sophia was sitting in the back seat of a taxi, watching the rain streak against the window. She held a burner phone to her ear. "Jean-Luc," she said into the receiver. Her voice was calm, steady. "It is me, Sophie," a male voice answered, thick with a French accent. "It has been a long time. I did not think I would hear from you again." "I need the Falcon," she said. It was a code phrase they had established years ago, back when she first started moving small amounts of money into the European accounts. There was a pause on the line. "The Falcon is expensive, Cherie, and it is permanent." "The money is already in the Zurich account," Sophia said. "I need a flight tonight, out of Teterboro. Small plane, no flight plan filed until we are in the air. And the papers? I have the identity we discussed, Elena Rostova. I just need the transport. I can have a bird on the runway in 2 hours," Jean-Luc said. "Where are you going?" "You know better than to ask me that," Sophia said. "Just get me in the air." "D'accord, 2 hours. Don't be late." Sophia hung up. She removed the SIM card from the phone and rolled down the window. She flicked the tiny chip out into the wet street, where it disappeared into a puddle. She leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes. She was terrified. Her heart was beating so hard she thought it might crack a rib. But beneath the terror, there was something else. A tiny, fragile sprout of something she hadn't felt in a decade. Hope. The sun rose over the Moretti estate the next morning, but it brought no warmth. It brought only the screech of tires and the shouting of men. Luca was not there. He had spent the night at the hotel again, sitting in a chair by the window, watching the city wake up, terrified to go back to the empty house. Valeria was asleep in the bed behind him, but he had not touched her. At the villa, the iron gates were smashed open by a battering ram mounted on an armored vehicle. Dozens of agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI swarmed the grounds. They moved with military precision. They kicked in the front door. They secured the perimeter. Inside, the staff screamed. The maid dropped a tray of coffee. The gardener was thrown to the ground and handcuffed. Agents poured into the library. They swept the papers off the desk into evidence bags. They ripped the hard drives out of the computers. They pulled the paintings off the walls to check for safes. In the master bedroom, an agent picked up the diamond ring from the bed where Luca had tossed it. He tagged it, bagged it, and added it to the growing pile of seized assets. They were looking for Luca. They checked every room, every closet, every crawl space. Clear. The second floor is clear. Target is not on the premises. The lead agent, a man with a jaw like a granite block, spoke into his radio. We missed him. Put out an APB. Lock down the airports. He is in the wind. At 10 o'clock that morning, the televisions in every bar, airport, and living room in the city tuned into the same channel. A podium had been set up in front of the federal courthouse. Dozens of microphones were taped to it, creating a bouquet of black and silver mesh. Aileen Vaughn stepped up to the podium. She looked immaculate in a navy blue suit. She looked like justice personified. Camera flashes exploded like lightning, a strobe effect that illuminated her determined face. She waited for the noise to die down. "Good morning," she said, her voice projecting clear and strong. "My name is Aileen Vaughn, Assistant United States Attorney." She looked directly into the camera lens, as if she were looking through the screen and straight into Luca Moretti's soul. This morning, federal agents executed search warrants at 12 locations across the city and state connected to the Moretti crime family. We've seized assets, frozen bank accounts, and arrested 7 high-ranking lieutenants. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. We've formally indicted Luca Moretti on 42 counts. She continued. These charges include racketeering, money laundering, extortion, wire fraud, and 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. A murmur rippled through the press corps. Murder. They had finally said it. "The evidence we have is overwhelming," Aileen said. "We have financial records, we have surveillance, and we have audio recordings of Mr. Moretti ordering these crimes himself." In the hotel room, Luca stood frozen in front of the television. The remote dropped from his hand, hitting the carpet with a dull thud. Audio recordings. His blood turned to ice. He remembered the nights in the bedroom, the nights he had whispered his secrets to Sophia in the dark, the nights he had bragged about his power, thinking he was speaking to a vault, not realizing the vault had a door. "We are currently conducting a manhunt for Luca Moretti," Aileen said on the screen. "He is considered armed and dangerous. If you see him, do not approach him. Call the authorities immediately." Valeria sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes. "Luca, what is going on? Why are you—" She looked at the TV. She saw Luca's face on the screen next to the word, "Wanted." She screamed. Luca did not look at her. He stared at the television, at the ruins of his life being broadcast in high definition. "She did it," he whispered, the realization crashing over him like a tidal wave. "Sophia, she did it all." The fall of the House of Moretti did not happen in silence. It happened with the cacophony of breaking news alerts, the shrill ring of telephones that no one answered, and the roar of accusations broadcast across every screen in the city. Luca Moretti's face was everywhere. The photograph the media used was an old one, taken 5 years prior at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a community center he had funded. In the image, he looked regal, a benevolent king smiling at his subjects. Now, that smile looked sinister. plastered above chyrons that screamed racketeering, murder, and fugitive. By noon, the isolation was absolute. Luca stood in the cramped living room of a safe house in the industrial district of Queens. The blinds were drawn tight against the daylight. The air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and damp plaster. It was a far cry from the marble floors of his villa or the velvet luxury of the penthouse suite. He held a burner phone to his ear, listening to the hollow tone of a deadline. Senator Reeves. The man Luca had helped elect with a donation of $200,000, had disconnected his number. Councilman Miller, who had shaken Luca's hand the night before, had released a statement condemning organized crime and claiming he had never met Mr. Moretti in a private capacity. Even the bank in the Caymans, the fortress of financial secrecy, had gone dark. His access codes were invalid. The accounts were frozen. $50 million, the lifeblood of his operation, had turned into meaningless digits on a screen he could no longer touch. "They are all gone," Luca said, lowering the phone. His voice was hoarse. "The rats are jumping off the ship." Marco sat at a small, scarred kitchen table in the corner. He was the only one who had stayed. The other captains, the lieutenants, the soldiers who had sworn blood oaths, they were either in handcuffs or heading for the Canadian border. "We still have the cash reserves in the Jersey stash," Marco said, though he sounded like a man trying to convince himself. "And we have a few men left, the loyal ones." Loyal. Luca spat the word out like a curse. "There is no loyalty, Marco. There is only leverage, and we have lost ours." In the corner of the room, a young man sat hunched over a laptop. His name was Silas, a hacker on the Moretti payroll who usually handled identity theft and credit card fraud. Today, he was doing a forensic autopsy on Luca's life. Silas typed furiously, the blue light of the screen illuminating his pale, sweating face. "Boss," Silas said, his voice trembling. "I found it." Luca turned slowly. He felt a sensation of heavy dread in his limbs, a weight that made it hard to move. "You found the leak?" "I found the trail," Silas corrected. "The feds didn't just get lucky. Someone gave them the master key. They had the encrypted ledgers from the inner server, the ones that are never connected to the internet." "How?" Marco asked, standing up. "That server is air-gapped. You can only access it physically." "Exactly," Silas said. "Someone plugged a drive directly into the mainframe in the study. I traced the access log. It happened 2 nights ago, at 3 a.m. "Who?" Luca demanded. He walked toward the table, his shadow falling over the young hacker. "Who accessed it?" Silas swallowed hard. He turned the laptop around. On the screen was a security log. It showed a user login ID, admin_0. Luca stared at the screen. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The noise of the traffic outside faded into a dull hum. Admin_0. It was not a hacking code. It was a nickname. It was what he had jokingly called Sophia when he first taught her how to use the encrypted email system 10 years ago. She was patient zero of his legitimate life, the beginning of everything good. It was Mrs. Moretti, Silas whispered, terrified to speak the words. The digital signature matches her personal device and the IP address for the upload. It went straight to a secure Dropbox at the Department of Justice. Luca did not speak. He could not. He felt as if someone had reached into his chest and physically crushed his lungs. He staggered back a step, his hand finding the back of a chair to steady himself. Sophia. His mind flashed back to the previous night, the phone buzzing on the nightstand, the name on the screen. He remembered the time of the call. It had been just before midnight. He looked at the timestamp on the laptop screen. The data upload had happened at 3 a.m. A realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. "She called me," Luca whispered. Marco looked at him, confused. "What?" "She called me," Luca said, his voice rising, cracking with a sudden, violent grief. "Last night, before she went to the feds, before she gave them everything. She called me." He remembered silencing the phone. He remembered Valeria's hands on his chest. He remembered the arrogance of thinking he could talk to his wife later, that she would always be there waiting for him. "She was calling to warn me," Luca said. He sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands. She was giving me a chance. If I had just answered the phone, she might have stopped. She might have come home. Luca, Marco said gently, you do not know that. I know her, Luca roared, slamming his fist onto the table. The laptop jumped. I know her. She's not a rat. She's not a traitor. She loved me. She did this because I pushed her until she had nowhere else to go. She gave me one last chance to be her husband, and I ignored her to play with a whore. The door to the bedroom opened. Valeria stood there. She was wearing a silk robe that looked ridiculous in the grime of the safe house. Her makeup was smudged, her hair tangled. She looked scared, but also annoyed. She held a cigarette in one hand. Why are you shouting? She asked, her voice shrill. And when can we leave this dump? There is no hot water. Luca, I cannot live like this. Luca looked at her. For months, he had thought she was the sun. He had thought her youth and her hunger were what he needed to feel alive. Now, looking at her in the harsh light of his ruin, he saw her for what she was. She was a distraction, a shiny, hollow thing that he had traded his life for. He stood up. His face was terrifyingly calm. Get out, he said. Valeria blinked. What? Get out, Luca repeated. Leave, now. Luca, baby, you are stressed, Valeria said, taking a step toward him, trying to summon the seductive smile that had worked so many times before. We just need to go somewhere nice. The Caribbean. We can... You stupid girl, Luca said, his voice cold and dead. There is no Caribbean. There is no money. It is gone. And the reason it is gone is because I was busy with you instead of paying attention to the woman who actually mattered. Valeria stopped, her face crumpled. That is not fair. You told me you loved me. I lied, Luca said. I loved how you made me feel. Powerful, young. But you? I don't even know you. Valeria stared at him, her mouth open, then her shock turned to fury. She marched up to him and slapped him across the face. The sound was sharp, echoing in the small room. You are a bastard. Luca Moretti, she screamed, tears streaming down her face. You deserve this. You deserve to lose everything. Luca did not flinch. He did not touch his cheek. He simply turned his back on her. Marco, he said, give her $500 and put her in a cab. Send her to her mother's house in Jersey. If she speaks to the press, kill her. Luca, Valeria shrieked as Marco grabbed her arm. Go, Luca said to the wall. Before I change my mind. He listened to the sound of her struggling, then the door opening and closing, then silence. He was alone. He had stripped his life down to the studs, and he found that the structure was rotten. I have to go out, Luca said to the empty room. Boss, you can't, Silas squeaked from the corner. Your face is on every news channel. The cops are everywhere. I don't care, Luca said. He grabbed a baseball cap from the counter and pulled it low over his eyes. He shrugged on a heavy work jacket that belonged to one of his soldiers. I need air. He walked out of the safe house before the hacker could stop him. He did not go to the airport. He did not go to the docks. He took the subway, keeping his head down, surrounded by tired commuters who looked right through him. He traveled back in time, deep into the borough of Brooklyn, to a neighborhood of red brick walk-ups and fire escapes. He stood in front of a building on 4th Street. It was a shabby place with peeling paint and a front door that never locked properly. Apartment 4B. He climbed the stairs. They creaked in the exact same places they had 20 years ago. He reached the door and tried the handle. Locked. He leaned his shoulder against it and shoved. The wood was old and dry, the jamb splintered with a loud crack, and the door swung open. The apartment was vacant. It was between tenants, smelling of dust and floor wax. Luca walked in. The floorboards were bare. The walls were a pale, sickly yellow. He walked to the center of the living room and sat down on the floor. This was where they had started. He closed his eyes and he could see it, the cheap sofa they had bought from a thrift store. The table where Sophia had cooked pasta with sauce from a jar because they couldn't afford fresh tomatoes. The corner where they had put their first Christmas tree, a pathetic little thing that leaned to the left. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, behind his driver's license. Tucked away where no one ever looked was a small, Creased photograph. It was a Polaroid. The colors were fading. It showed Luca and Sofia sitting on the fire escape of this very building. They were 21. Luca was wearing a grease-stained t-shirt. Sofia was wearing one of his oversized flannels. They were laughing, their heads thrown back, eyes closed, oblivious to the poverty, oblivious to the violence, oblivious to the future that would destroy them. They looked happy. "I broke it," Luca whispered to the empty room. "I broke everything." He sat there for an hour as the sun went down and the shadows lengthened across the floor. He traced Sofia's face in the photo with his thumb. He thought about the silence in the house the last few months. He thought about the way she had looked at him at breakfast, cold, distant, disappointed. He realized now that her coldness hadn't been hatred. It had been grief. She had been mourning him while he was still sitting across the table. Darkness fell completely. The streetlights outside flickered on, casting orange bars of light across the floorboards. Luca stood up. His legs were stiff. He tucked the photo back into his wallet, placing it against his heart. He had to move. Staying here was suicide. He needed to get back to Marco, gather the cash from the Jersey stash, and figure out a way to survive. He walked out of the apartment, leaving the broken door ajar. He exited the building through the rear, heading into the alley that led to a small, private parking garage where he had left the car Marco had given him, a dented Ford sedan that wouldn't attract attention. The garage was dark, lit only by a few flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed like angry insects. The air smelled of gasoline and oil. Luca walked toward the Ford, his keys in his hand. He was 10 feet away when the hair on the back of his arm stood up. It was an instinct honed by 20 years of war, a shift in the air, the sound of a shoe scuffing against concrete. Luca dropped to a crouch instantly. Crack. A bullet chipped the concrete pillar right where his head had been a second before. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. "He is here! Get him!" a voice shouted. It was not a police officer. It was a rough, guttural voice. More shots rang out. Bang, bang, bang. Luca scrambled behind a concrete pillar. He reached for the gun tucked into his waistband, a snub-nosed .38 Special. It was a holdout weapon, not meant for a firefight. Masked men were advancing from the shadows. He saw 3 of them. They moved with the chaotic aggression of street thugs, not the discipline of federal agents. These were not cops. These were wolves, the Romanos, or maybe the Russians. It didn't matter. They had smelled blood in the water. The king was wounded. His castle had fallen, and now the scavengers were coming to tear the meat from his bones. "Come out, Moretti!" one of them yelled. "Romano sends his regards." Luca gritted his teeth. He peered around the edge of the pillar. One of the shooters was advancing on his left, moving between the parked cars. Luca waited. He slowed his breathing. The man stepped into the open. Luca fired. The shot hit the man in the chest. He crumpled without a sound. "He's got a piece!" another voice screamed. Bullets hammered the pillar, sending concrete dust spraying into Luca's eyes. He winced. Shielding his face, a ricochet sliced across his upper arm, tearing through the heavy jacket and biting into the flesh. Luca grunted, clutching his arm. Warm blood soaked his sleeve immediately. He was pinned. He had 5 rounds left. There were at least 2 more shooters. He looked at the Ford sedan. It was 20 feet away. Too far. He looked to his right. There was a fire exit door. Heavy steel. Painted red. He had to make a run for it. "Flank him! Go right!" Luca didn't wait. He pushed off the pillar, sprinting for the door. He fired blindly over his shoulder as he ran. Bang, bang, forcing the shooters to duck. He hit the crash bar of the fire door with his good shoulder. It flew open, spilling him out into the alleyway. A bullet whizzed past his ear, sparking against the brick wall. Luca stumbled, regained his balance, and ran. He didn't look back. He sprinted down the alley, his boots splashing through puddles, his breath tearing at his throat. He turned a corner, then another, weaving through the labyrinth of the city until the sounds of pursuit faded into the background noise of sirens and traffic. He collapsed into the shadows of a loading dock, sliding down the wall until he hit the ground. He pressed his hand over the wound on his arm. It was bleeding freely, pulsing with a hot, sharp pain. He looked up at the sliver of sky visible between the buildings. It was black and indifferent. He was bleeding. He was hunted. He had no money. He had no soldiers. The betrayal was total. Sophia had taken his legitimacy. The feds had taken his freedom. And now his enemies were coming to take his life. He closed his eyes, fighting the wave of dizziness. Any other man would have given up. Any other man would have walked into the nearest police station and begged for protective custody. But Luca Moretti was not any other man. Beneath the pain, beneath the grief, a cold ember of resolve began to glow. He was not going to die in a gutter. Not like this. He thought of Sophia. He thought of the look in her eyes, the pain he had put there. He didn't want to kill her. The anger he had felt in the safe house had burned itself out, leaving only ashes and clarity. He didn't want revenge. He wanted answers. He wanted to look her in the eye and ask her why she hadn't just left him, why she had felt the need to burn the world down to get away from him. He needed to understand who he had become in her eyes. Luca grit his teeth and pushed himself up the wall. He wrapped a strip of cloth torn from his shirt around his arm, pulling it tight until the world swam with white spots. He tied the knot. He checked his gun. 3 rounds left. Survivors. He whispered to the dark. He would disappear. He would go underground, deeper than he had ever gone before. He would find the scraps of resources he had hidden away that not even Marco knew about. He would heal. He would survive. And then he would find her. Luca Moretti limped out of the alleyway, disappearing into the night, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own empire. The rain in Paris was different from the rain in New York. In New York, the rain was aggressive, a rhythmic drumming against the concrete that demanded to be heard. Here, in the narrow, winding streets of the 11th arrondissement, the rain was a gray mist that soaked into the bones, silent and persistent. Luca Moretti pulled the collar of his wool coat up around his neck. He looked nothing like the man who had graced the covers of tabloids weeks ago. The bespoke Italian suits were gone, replaced by dark jeans and a heavy sweater he had bought at a surplus store. A thick beard covered his jaw, hiding the scar from the bullet that had grazed him in the parking garage. He moved with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the night his empire had finally collapsed under the weight of his own arrogance. He stopped in front of a nondescript bistro with peeling blue paint. The sign in the window said closed, but Luca knew better. He pushed the door open. The bell chimed, a cheerful sound that clashed with the tension in Luca's shoulders. Inside, a man was wiping down the zinc counter. He was bald, with a thick mustache and eyes that shifted nervously toward the door. This was Jean-Luc, a facilitator for people who did not want to be found. He was also the man who had arranged Sophia's flight. Jean-Luc looked up. He froze. The rag in his hand stopped moving. "Monsieur Moretti," Jean-Luc whispered, his face draining of color. "You are dead. The news said you were dead. Do I look dead to you?" Luca asked. His voice was rough, scraped raw by weeks of silence and travel. He walked to the bar. He did not draw a weapon. He did not need to. The menace radiated off him, cold and palpable. He placed a hand on the counter. His fingers splayed. "Where is she?" Luca asked. "I cannot," Jean-Luc stammered, backing away until he hit the rows of liquor bottles behind him. "She paid for the platinum package." Total silence. "If I talk, my reputation is ruined." "Your reputation," Luca repeated calmly. He leaned in. "Jean-Luc, look at me. Look at what I have become. Do you think I care about your reputation? I have lost my wife. I have lost my life. I am a ghost haunting Europe, and ghosts can be very dangerous when they are denied what they want." Jean-Luc swallowed hard. He looked at Luca's eyes. There was no mercy there, only a desperate, consuming fire. "She's not in Paris," Jean-Luc said, his voice barely audible. "She wanted quiet, somewhere with no people. I set her up in a cottage in Normandy, a village called Beuvron-en-Auge." Luca stared at him for a long moment, memorizing the name. Then he reached into his coat pocket. Jean-Luc flinched, expecting a gun. Luca pulled out a roll of cash, euros, dirty and worn. He tossed it onto the counter. "For the inconvenience." Lucas said. He turned and walked out into the gray mist, leaving the facilitator shaking behind the bar. 300 kilometers away, in the rolling green hills of Normandy, the world was silent. The cottage was small, built of timber and stone, with a thatched roof that dripped with moss. It sat on the edge of a dense forest, isolated from the rest of the village, inside. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows against the exposed wooden beams. Sophia sat in a velvet armchair, her legs tucked beneath her. She held a book in her lap, but she had not turned a page in an hour. Her eyes were fixed on the small television set in the corner. It was tuned to an international news channel. The screen showed grainy footage from a security camera in a train station in Brussels. The caption read, "Fugitive mob boss sighted." The figure in the video was blurry. He wore a hat pulled low, and he walked with a limp. He looked thin, haggard. He looked like a stray dog that had been kicked one too many times. Sophia felt a sharp, physical pain in the center of her chest. She flinched, her hand going to her mouth. "He's hurt," she whispered to the empty room. She should be happy. She should be relieved. She had destroyed him, just as she planned. She had stripped him of his power, his money, and his ego. Justice had been served, but looking at the broken man on the screen, she did not feel like a victor. She felt like a widow. She turned off the television, plunging the room into silence. She walked to the window and looked out at the rain. The garden was overgrown, wild with lavender and ivy. It was beautiful, but it was lonely. She told herself she was safe here. She told herself he would never find her. She told herself that even if he did, she hated him enough to turn him away. A car engine hummed in the distance. Sophia stiffened. Cars rarely came down this lane. It was a dead end. She watched through the rain-streaked glass. A battered black sedan rolled slowly up the gravel driveway. It stopped. The engine was cut out. The driver's door opened. A boot hit the gravel, then another. The man who stepped out was soaking wet within seconds. He did not run for cover. He stood by the car, looking up at the house. Sophia stopped breathing, even through the beard, even through the slump of his shoulders. She knew him. She knew the way he held his head. She knew the shape of his hands. It was Luca. Panic, cold and electric, shot through her veins. She backed away from the window. She looked at the back door. She could run. She could disappear into the woods, but her feet would not move. She heard his footsteps on the stone path, heavy, uneven, thud, 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 then a knock. 3 solid raps on the heavy oak door. Sophia stared at the wood. She could leave him out there. She could call the local police. They would be here in 20 minutes. She walked to the door. Her hand trembled as she reached for the latch. She unlocked it and pulled it open. The wind blew the rain into the entryway, chilling her skin. Luca stood on the threshold. Water dripped from his hair, running down the grooves of his face. His eyes were red-rimmed, dark with exhaustion. He looked at her as if she were an apparition, something he was afraid would vanish if he blinked. "Sophia," he rasped. The sound of her name, spoken in that familiar, broken voice, cracked something open inside her. "How did you find me?" she asked. Her voice was steady, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "It does not matter," Lucas said. He did not step inside. He respected the threshold. "I just needed to see that you were safe." "I am safe," Sophia said coldly. "I am safe because I left you." Luca winced. The words hit him harder than the bullet had. "I know." "Go away, Luca," she said, starting to close the door. "There is nothing left to say. You made your choice. I made mine." "Sophia, please," Luca said. He put his hand on the door, stopping it. He did not push. He just held it. 5 minutes. That is all I ask. 5 minutes to explain. Then I will go. I will disappear. And you will never see me again. I swear it. Sophia looked at his hand, rough, scarred, shaking slightly. She looked at his face. She saw the desperation there, the raw, bleeding honesty that she had not seen in years. She stepped back, leaving the door open. 5 minutes, she said, and then you leave. Luca stepped inside. He closed the door. Shutting out the wind and the rain, the room suddenly felt very small. He stood by the door, dripping onto the rug. He looked around the modest cottage. It was cozy, warm. It smelled of wood smoke and the jasmine tea she liked. It was a home, a real home, not a museum like the villa he had bought her. "It suits you," he said quietly. "Do not make small talk. Luca," Sophia said, crossing her arms over her chest. She stood by the fireplace, putting the furniture between them. "Why are you here? To kill me? To scream at me for ruining your life?" "No," Luca said. "I came to tell you that you were right." Sophia blinked. The anger she had been prepared to unleash faltered. "What?" "You were right," Luca said, taking a step forward. "I was arrogant. I was blind. I thought I could have everything. I thought I could have the power, the money, the mistress, and still come home to you and have you waiting for me like a loyal dog. I was never a dog," Sophia spat, her eyes flashing. "I was your partner. I was the one who stitched your wounds. I was the one who lied for you, and you treated me like a piece of furniture." "I know," Luca said. His voice broke. "I know. I got lost. Sophia. Life. It eats you. It makes you think you are a god. And when Valeria looked at me, she saw the god. She saw the power. It was intoxicating. She saw the money," Sophia corrected brutally. "She saw the gifts. She didn't know you. She didn't know the way you wake up screaming from nightmares. She didn't know the way you look when you think no one is watching." "You knew," Luca whispered. "You always knew." "Yes," Sophia shouted, the tears finally spilling over. "I knew, and I loved you anyway. That is the tragedy. Luca, I loved the man, but you wanted to be the monster." "I don't want to be the monster anymore," Luca said. He walked toward her, ignoring the invisible barrier she had erected. "I have nothing left, Sophia. The money is gone. The family is gone. The reputation is ashes. I am standing here with nothing but the clothes on my back. You deserve nothing," Sophia said, though her voice lacked the venom it had held a moment ago. "I know," Luca said. He stopped directly in front of her. He did not touch her. He stood close enough that she could smell the rain and the wood smoke on him. "But I had to tell you, you were everything. You were the only real thing in my life. And I was a fool to trade gold for brass." He looked at her, his eyes searching her face, memorizing her one last time. "5 minutes are up," he whispered. He turned to leave. Sophia watched his back. She watched the slump of his shoulders, the defeat in his walk. She saw the man she had fallen in love with 20 years ago, the boy who had nothing, who had fought for everything, and who had lost his way. "Luca," she said. He stopped, his hand on the door latch. "You are bleeding," she said. She pointed to his shoulder, where a fresh spot of red had bloomed on his sweater from the exertion of the travel. Luca looked down. "It is an old wound. It opened up. You cannot drive like that," Sophia said. Her voice was quiet. She walked toward him. She reached out and covered his hand on the latch. Her skin was warm against his cold fingers. "Stay," she whispered. "Just for tonight." Luca turned to her. He looked at her with a hope so fragile it terrified her. "Sophia?" She did not answer with words. She reached up and touched his face. Her thumb traced the line of his cheekbone, the roughness of his beard. "I hate you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I hate you for what you did." "I love you," Luca replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I have always loved you." He leaned in, giving her the chance to pull away. She did not. He kissed her. It was not the smooth, confident kiss of the Mafia Don. It was desperate. It was salty with tears. It was a collision of two people who had been drowning and had suddenly found air. Sophia made a sound in the back of her throat, half sob, half moan, and gripped his coat, pulling him closer. They stumbled backward, the door forgotten. "Wait!" Luca pulled back, breathless, his forehead resting against hers. "Are you sure?" "Shut up," Sophia said. She grabbed the lapels of his coat and shoved it off his shoulders. They moved through the door and out into the rain. It sounds madness, but the cottage felt too small for the storm of emotion breaking between them. The cold rain soaked them instantly, plastering their clothes to their bodies, washing away the dust of the road and the scent of the prison he had built for himself. He kissed her in the downpour, lifting her up, her legs wrapping around his waist. It was raw and primal, a reclaiming of something he thought was lost forever. They stumbled back inside, shivering, water pooling on the floorboards. They moved to the rug in front of the fireplace. The fire was dying, casting a low, orange glow across the room. Luca's hands shook as he reached for the buttons of her blouse. He, whose hands had been steady while holding a gun, could barely manage the small pearl buttons. Sophia brushed his hands away and undid them herself, her eyes never leaving his face. When the skin finally touched the skin, it was electric. The heat of the fire mixed with the heat of their bodies. Luca worshipped her. He kissed the scars he knew, the birthmark on her shoulder, the pulse fluttering in her neck. He moved with a slow, agonizing tenderness, terrified that if he moved too fast, she would shatter. Sophia held him. She ran her hands over his back, feeling the new ridges of scar tissue, the map of his violence. She kissed his mouth, tasting the rain and the grief. This was not the sex of a marriage. It was not the sex of an affair. It was a conversation. It was an apology and an accusation woven into one. It was a desperate attempt to bridge the canyon that lay between them, using their bodies to say the things that words could not fix. Later, the fire had burned down to embers. They lay tangled together under a heavy wool blanket. The only sound was the rain tapping gently against the roof and the settling of the logs in the grate. Luca lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. Sophia lay with her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. She traced a pattern on his skin with her fingertip. "I still don't trust you," she whispered into the darkness. The words hung in the air, heavy and true. The passion of the night had not erased the betrayal of the year. Luca tightened his arm around her, pulling her closer. He kissed the top of her head. "I know," he said softly. "I do not expect you to." He paused, looking at the dying light of the fire. "Then I will spend the rest of my life earning it," he said, "if you will let me." Sophia did not answer. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of him seep into her, knowing that warmth was dangerous. Luca fell asleep first, the exhaustion of the hunt finally claiming him. He slept deeply, for the first time in weeks, anchored by the weight of his wife in his arms. When Luca woke, the room was cold. The fire was dead. The rain had stopped. Morning light, pale and weak, filtered through the windows. He reached out across the rug. His hand met empty wool. Luca sat up, his heart seizing. Sophia? The cottage was silent. He scrambled up, wrapping the blanket around his waist. He ran to the bedroom. Empty. The bathroom? Empty? He ran to the front door and threw it open. The driveway was empty. There were tire tracks in the mud, leading away from the cottage and back toward the main road. She was gone. Luca stood there, the cold morning air biting at his bare skin. He felt a surge of panic, a desire to run after her, to chase her down again. Then he turned back to the room. On the pillow where her head had rested, there was a piece of paper. Luca walked over to it. His hands trembled as he picked it up. It was a single sheet of stationery. Her handwriting was elegant, sharp, and decisive. Luca. Last night was a goodbye. Or perhaps it was a beginning. I do not know yet. You say you want to earn my trust. You say you want to be the man I fell in love with, not the monster. Prove it. The Romano family is moving into the territory. They will burn the city to the ground. They will kill innocent people. They will undo everything we built, not the criminal empire, but the order. You cannot hide here with me, not while the wolves are at the door. If you stay, you are a coward. If you run, you are a fugitive. You need to fix what you broke, all of it, alone. If you survive, find me. S. Luca lowered the note. He read it again and again. She hadn't left him because she didn't love him. She had left him because she needed him to be a man worthy of that love. She was sending him back into the fire, not to reclaim his crown, but to clean up his mess. He looked at the fireplace. The ashes were cold. He looked at the empty driveway. A slow, grim determination settled over his face. The desperation of the night before was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Fix what I broke," he whispered. He folded the note carefully and placed it in the pocket of his jeans. He went to the sink and splashed cold water on his face. He looked at his reflection. The beard was wild, the eyes were tired, but the weakness was gone. He dressed quickly. He checked his gun. He had 3 bullets left. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Luca Moretti walked out of the cottage, leaving the door unlocked. He began the long walk to the village to find a phone. He had a war to finish. The return to America was not a homecoming. It was an infiltration. Luca Moretti touched down on a private airstrip in rural New Jersey 3 days after leaving France. He did not have an entourage. He did not have a motorcade of black SUVs waiting for him. He had a fake passport, a duffel bag containing the last of his liquid cash, and a singular, burning purpose. The city across the river looked the same, a glittering skyline of steel and ambition, but the rot beneath the surface had spread. In the vacuum left by the Moretti collapse, chaos had taken root. Street gangs were warring over corners that Luca had kept quiet for a decade, but the real threat was not the chaos. It was the new order trying to impose itself. Romano Salvi. Salvi had been a mid-level boss in a neighboring territory, a man Luca had once invited to his wedding, a man who had kissed Sophia's hand and drunk Luca's wine. Now, Salvi was circling the carcass of the Moretti Empire like a vulture, picking off Luca's remaining men, seizing his territories, and threatening the stability of the entire underworld. Luca met Marco in the basement of a defunct bakery in the Bronx. The ovens were cold, covered in sheets of dust. The air smelled of stale flour and despair. Marco looked 10 years older. His suit was frayed at the cuffs. He sat at a metal prep table surrounded by 4 other men. These were the last of them, the only ones who hadn't flipped, run, or died. When Luca walked down the stairs, the men stood up. They looked at him with a mixture of relief and fear. They saw the beard, the scar, the darkness in his eyes. They saw a man who had walked through fire. "Boss," Marco said, his voice thick with emotion. "We heard you were in Europe. We thought you were gone for good." "I was," Luca said. He dropped the duffel bag onto the table. The heavy thud echoed in the silence. "But I had unfinished business." He unzipped the bag. It was filled with stacks of cash, euros and dollars mixed together. "Take it," Luca commanded. The men hesitated. "Take it," Luca repeated, his voice sharper. "Divide it. This is everything I have left. It is your severance." "Severance?" Marco asked, stepping forward. "Luca, we are ready to fight. We can take the city back. Salvi is weak. He relies on mercenaries. If we strike now—" "No," Luca interrupted. He walked to a metal trash can in the center of the room. He reached inside his coat and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. It was the master book, the one copy of the family tree, the debts, the favors, the history of the Moretti name. He took a lighter from his pocket, flicked the flame, and held it to the edge of the book. The leather curled and blackened. The pages caught fire. "Luca!" one of the soldiers gasped. "That is the history." "That is a tombstone," Luca said, watching the flames lick upward. He dropped the burning book into the trash can. "There is no Moretti family anymore. The empire is dead. I killed it." He looked up at the men, his eyes hard but clear. "We are not a family anymore," he declared, his voice ringing off the concrete walls. "We are survivors. You take this money and you leave. You go to Ohio. You go to Florida. You go to hell for all I care. But you get out of this life. Tonight. And you?" Marco asked quietly. "What about you?" "I have one last meeting," Luca said. "Romano is expecting me to run. He thinks I am weak. He thinks I am broken." Luca pulled a heavy black pistol from his waistband and checked the chamber. "He's going to be disappointed." The meeting point was a shipping warehouse on the waterfront, a cavernous structure of corrugated iron and rust. It was neutral ground. Theoretically, Romano Salvi had agreed to meet there to negotiate the terms of Luca's surrender. Romano arrived with 6 men. He wore a camel hair coat and smoked a cigar, looking every inch the conquering king. He stood in the center of the warehouse, surrounded by crates, his men fanning out into the shadows. "He is late!" Romano sneered, checking his gold watch. "Typical Moretti arrogance. Even when he has nothing, he makes us wait." "I am not late," a voice echoed from the darkness above. Romano's head snapped up. Luca stood on the iron catwalk 20 feet above the warehouse floor. He was a silhouette against the high windows, a shadow detached from the night. "Luca," Romano shouted, spreading his arms wide. "Come down. Let us talk like civilized men. Kiss the ring, and I will let you leave the city with your life." "I did not come to kiss rings." "Romano," Luca called down. "I came to burn the kingdom." Luca raised his hand. He was holding a flare. He pulled the tab and dropped it. The red light hissed as it fell, illuminating the floor below. It landed on a pile of oil-soaked rags Luca had planted an hour ago near the main support beams. The fire roared to life instantly, a wall of heat that separated Romano from the exit. "Kill him!" Romano screamed, diving behind a crate. Gunfire erupted. The warehouse turned into a thunderdome of noise and flashing light. Bullets sparked against the iron catwalk. Luca moved, running low, firing down into the chaos. This was not a battle for territory. This was a surgical excision. Luca dropped from the catwalk onto a stack of pallets, rolling to absorb the impact. He came up firing. 2 of Romano's men went down. He moved through the smoke, a ghost in the machine. He knew this warehouse. He had owned it for 10 years. He knew every shadow, every angle. A shooter stepped out from behind a forklift. Luca fired twice. The man fell, but there were too many of them. A bullet tore through the meat of Luca's thigh, spinning him around. He crashed into a metal shelf, pain exploding up his leg. He grunted, gritting his teeth, dragging himself behind cover. His leg was burning. Blood soaked his jeans. "I have him!" Romano's voice yelled. "He is wounded! Flank him!" Luca checked his magazine. 2 rounds. He closed his eyes for a second. He saw Sophia's face. He saw the rain in Normandy. He saw the note on the pillow. "Fix what you broke." He was not going to die here. He refused. He took a deep breath and stood up. Romano was 10 yards away, advancing with a shotgun, confident in his victory. Luca stepped out into the open. Romano hesitated, surprised by the sheer audacity of the move. That split second was all Luca needed. He raised his gun. His hand was steady. Bang! The shot hit Romano squarely in the center of the chest. The man looked down, shocked, his cigar falling from his mouth. He collapsed to the concrete floor. The remaining 3 soldiers froze. Their boss was dead. The warehouse was burning. The sirens of police cars were wailing in the distance, getting louder by the second. "Go!" Luca roared at them, waving his gun. "It is over!" The mercenaries looked at Romano's body, then at the fire, then at the police lights flashing through the high windows. They dropped their weapons and ran for the back exit. Luca was alone. The fire was spreading, eating the oxygen in the room. The pain in his leg was blinding. He limped toward the side door, dragging his injured leg. Every step was agony. Every step was penance. He burst out into the cool night air just as the first police cruiser screeched into the lot. A black sedan was waiting in the alley, engine idling. Marco was behind the wheel. He had disobeyed the order to leave. Luca threw himself into the back seat. "Drive," he gasped, as the car peeled away, disappearing into the labyrinth of the city streets. Luca looked back. The warehouse was an inferno, casting a hellish orange glow against the skyline. The Moretti Empire was ash. Romano was dead. The war was over. Luca leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes. He was bleeding. He was a fugitive. He had nothing, and for the first time in his life, he was free. 6 months later, the coast of Puglia, in the heel of Italy's boot, was a place of blinding white stone and turquoise water. It was a place where time moved slowly, measured not in hours, but in the rising and setting of the sun. Sophia lived in a small, whitewashed house on a cliff overlooking the Adriatic Sea. She went by the name Elena now. She worked in a local pottery shop, painting designs on clay bowls. She spoke Italian with a local dialect, wore simple linen dresses, and walked along the beach every evening. She was safe. She was peaceful. But she was hollow. One afternoon, a courier arrived at her door. He carried a heavy package wrapped in brown paper. "Signora Elena," he asked. "Si." she replied. She took the package inside. There was no return address. The postmark was from Argentina. Her hands trembled as she set it on the kitchen table. She used a knife to slice the tape. Inside was a small, heavy metal box and a letter. She opened the letter first. The handwriting was familiar, sharp, decisive, but slightly shaky, as if written by a hand that was tired. Sophia, I did as you asked. The books are burned. The territory is gone. The wolves are dead or scattered. No one is looking for you anymore. You are free. The house in Puglia is yours. The deed is in the box, under the name Elena Rostova. I bought it through a shell company years ago. One even the feds never found. I left you everything I could not protect before. I am not asking for you to come back. I am not asking for a second chance. I just wanted you to know that I heard you. I finally heard you. I hope one day you will forgive me. El Sofia put the letter down. A tear traced a hot line down her cheek. She opened the metal box. Inside were the deeds to the house, fully paid. There was a stack of bearer bonds, enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life. There were photos, old Polaroids of them in New York. Smiling, young, oblivious, and at the bottom of the box, resting on a velvet cushion, was a ring. It was not the massive, flawless diamond she had left on the sink. It was a simple gold band. The one he had given her when they were 21, the one she had worn before the money and the blood washed over them, the one he had ignored for years in favor of flashier things. He had kept it, all this time, through the raids, the safe houses, the fire in the warehouse. He had kept the symbol of their beginning. Sophia picked up the ring. She slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She walked to the window and looked out at the sea. The horizon was vast and empty. "You idiot," she whispered, crying and laughing at the same time. "You finally fixed it." 1 year later, the vineyard was located in the foothills of the Andes, near Mendoza, Argentina. It was a small operation, nothing like the grand estates of Napa or Tuscany. The soil was rocky, the wind was harsh, and the work was brutal. Luca Moretti wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of a gloved hand. He wore dusty work boots, jeans stained with earth, and a flannel shirt faded by the sun. A jagged white scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into his beard. He walked with a slight limp, the legacy of the warehouse floor. He was not a boss here. He was just a man. He pruned the vines. He fixed the fences. He carried the crates. The locals knew him as Matteo. They knew he was quiet, hard-working, and carried a sadness that seemed older than the mountains. It was early morning. The sun was just cresting the peaks, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. Luca was kneeling by a row of Malbec vines, checking the irrigation line. The work was meditative. It kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. He heard the crunch of gravel. He did not reach for a gun. He didn't own one anymore. He stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from his knees. He turned toward the sound. A woman was walking down the dirt path that led from the main road. She wore a white dress that caught the wind. She wore a wide-brimmed hat to shield her eyes from the sun. She carried a single suitcase. Luca froze. His heart, which he thought had atrophied into a muscle solely for survival, slammed against his ribs. He stopped breathing. Sophia stopped 10 feet away from him. She took off her hat. Her hair was loose, blowing around her face. She looked older, wiser. There were fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But she was more beautiful than the memory he had kept alive in the dark. She looked at him. She saw the scars. She saw the rough hands. She saw the simple life he had built out of the ashes of his greed. She saw the man she had fallen in love with in a walk-up apartment in Brooklyn. Luca could not speak. His throat was closed tight with emotion. He stood there, terrified that if he moved, she would disappear like a mirage in the heat. They stood in silence for a long time, the wind whistling through the vines, the mountains standing witness. Sophia looked down at his hands. Then she raised her own hand. On her ring finger, the simple gold band glinted in the morning sun. Luca let out a breath that sounded like a sob. Tears welled in his eyes, spilling over, tracking through the dust on his face. He didn't rush to her. He didn't fall to his knees. He simply waited, giving her the choice he had denied her for so long. Sophia took a step forward, then another. She stopped just inches from him. She looked up into his eyes, seeing the ghost of the love that had survived the fire. She didn't say, "I love you." She didn't say, "I forgive you." She simply looked at him, deep and long, and then, with a small, sad smile, she nodded once. It was enough. The sun rose higher, bathing them both in light, casting two shadows that finally, after everything, merged into one. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the rise, fall, and redemption of Luca and Sophia. Writing this story has been an emotional ride, exploring how power can corrupt love and how sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening or reading from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this intense, realistic take on the genre, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories. I have many more tales of passion, betrayal, and loyalty waiting for you. Share your thoughts in the comments in English. Did Luca deserve his second chance? Would you have forgiven him? I read every comment and can't wait to hear your perspective. Until next time, keep the romance alive.